A warm welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. Before we start the proceedings, may I request all of you to switch off your mobiles or put them on silent mode, because this is going live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and FCC website. The FCC is delighted to host this discussion on India-Pakistan. This book by the late Satinder Kumar Lamba is the immediate provocation for doing this discussion. We are delighted to have with us Mr. Ajay Bisaria, who was the most recent. Then Dr. Sanjay Baru, who was Dr. Manmohan Singh's information advisor when Satinder Lamba was taking care of track diplomacy. And then I have on my right is Dr. Raja Mohan, the eminent columnist and expert on international affairs. May I now request my colleague Simran Sodhi to introduce our distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Ajay Bisaria with us today. He's a strategic advisor and commentator on international affairs. He's had a distinguished diplomatic career for 35 years as a member of the Indian Foreign Service. He dealt with some of India's key economic and security relationships. He served as Indian High Commissioner to Canada and to Pakistan. Earlier, he served as India's ambassador to Poland and Lithuania, and he was also a key aide to Prime Minister Vajpayee from 1999 to 2000. He has also authored many books. Professor Raja Mohan is a senior fellow with the Asia Society Policy Institute in New Delhi. Professor Mohan is also one of India's leading commentators on India's foreign policy. He has been associated with a number of think tanks. He writes a regular column for the Indian Express and was earlier the strategic affairs editor for the Hindu newspaper. He is also a well-known author, and in 2015, he's expanding India's. Thank you.
Thanks, Simran. I will now invite each one of our distinguished panelists, first Ajay Bisaria, then Dr. Baru, and then Raja Mohan, to make a few opening remarks. After that, we will throw the session to Q&A so that you have the maximum amount of time to ask questions. Ajay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. This is my first visit to the Foreign Correspondents Club. I always knew about building in Mathura Road, but didn't know what happened there. So it's good to be here. And another reason I'm delighted to be this is a tribute to Lamba Sahab, one of our most distinguished diplomats, but also personally for me. And let me, if I may, just start with a couple of stories which Lamba Sahab mentioned in the book, and where I was in the room. So this is something that. So Lamba Sahab was in fact my ambassador when I was posted in Berlin, in Germany, and he was then posted in Russia when I was working with Prime Minister Vajpayee. So I knew him outside the context of Pakistan first couple of times. But the first time I heard him discuss Pakistan was when Lamba Sahab was invited just before the Agra summit of 2001 by Prime Minister Vajpayee to join a meeting which was a fairly large meeting with Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh and the NSA and Brijesh Mishra and others. And this was asked as for the Pakistan Pakistan expert to talk about what he thought should be India's policy towards Pakistan. What can we make of this new dictator who had taken over in Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf? And from what Lama Saab mentions here, was that he advised on three things: that it should be an agenda-less summit, and it should discuss normalization of relations, and it should talk about all things, including Jammu and Kashmir. So this is, I think, the sum of his advice. And again, just before the Islamabad summit, and the SAARC summit in Islamabad in January 2004, which, as you know, was a major breakthrough summit in this relationship. Lamba Saab again came in to brief Prime Minister Vajpayee. It was my job as his private secretary to collect as much information from experts to get the Prime Minister briefed on what the possibilities were. And he mentions this in this book, and that's why I wanted to repeat what he said. He came and he briefed Prime Minister Vajpayee. They had a conversation. I was the third person in the room. And then I called him back. I discussed this with Prime Minister Vajpayee, called him back, and I said, you made some very interesting points, 7 points, which I've jotted down, but please, can you write them down and send them to me? So he did come back and the handwritten 7 points, which I got typed up and became inputs. And what he said was, his suggestion was, one, strengthen the ceasefire line of 2003. That ceasefire line, incidentally, we've repeated that formulation in February 2021. Second, he said no harm to India through Pakistani jihadi or official action. Third, diplomatic missions to work on an agreed code of conduct, resumption of economic trade, etc. So what Lamba Saab advised finally got into the January 2004 statement, which was a joint press statement, which said that Musharraf assured Prime Minister Vajpayee that he will not permit any territory under Pakistan's control to be used for and to support terrorism in any manner. So this was a very important formulation in those times, and what it did give us at that point of time was 4 years of peace, broken only in 2008 with Mumbai, and perhaps a little earlier with some terrorist attacks, but at least the relationship was sustained in a major way till then. So again, I had the opportunity to talk to Lamba Saab before I went to Pakistan in 2017. And we had a long lunch at the India International Center. And one of the bits of advice he gave me was social. He said, after 5 p.m. in Pakistan, don't discuss Kashmir. So it's okay to talk about it in the morning. But, I think it was a very wise bit of advice, which I followed to the T. Because, over 2 whiskeys discussing Kashmir with Pakistan can get very emotive. So I clearly stayed away from that divisive issue through most of my tenure in Pakistan. But I think in many ways, this is a very important book because I was kind of looking at books written by former high commissioners, ambassadors to Pakistan. So there have been in the last 75 years, 25 ambassadors to high commissioners. I was the 25th and none after me. Lamba Saab was the 16th. And about 10 of them at least have written excellent books or written at length about their tenures. And I think that really helps us in multiple ways in understanding the nature of diplomacy between India and Pakistan. Also, I think, perhaps in the next round, we'll talk about the subject which you're talking about, which is the possibility of peace. But I also wanted to mention, in a sense, the 4-point plan which Lamba Saab in this book talks about at great length, and I think that is a very important piece of the analysis, a gap that he fills. And in many ways, that was an idea ahead of its time because we needed to build a certain level of trust before we got to a place where we could have that conversation about making borders irrelevant. And I think it was an idea ahead of its time. It seems very impractical today because how do you open borders and how through these open borders? That is a policy question that engages all of us. But the question really is that whether this can be frozen and unfrozen at a time when we are able to build that trust to take that relationship forward. So let me stop right here in this round and then take it forward when we have a conversation.
Sanjaya?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaikanathan. It's always a pleasure to come back to the Foreign Correspondents Club. Uh, Let me begin where Ajay left off, which is the 4 points. And it's interesting that he remarked that it was ahead of its time. So let me say a little bit about the way in which I look at those 4 points. First and foremost, I make an IPR claim, which is that my book, which I wrote about my time in the Prime Minister's office, revealed for the first time what these 4 points were. And when it came out, there was silence on the part of all those who were engaged, including Mr. Lamba. And I was repeatedly asked in several discussions on that book whether these 4 points were correct or whether I was bluffing, etc. There was a lot of debate and discussion, and therefore I'm delighted when I saw this book. And in fact, on many occasions between 2014, when my book came out, and last year, when just before Mr. Lamba passed away, I did say to him on many occasions, "Why don't you write something?" He did give a lecture, I think in Chandigarh, in Srinagar, a little after my book came out, where he mentioned some of this, but left it a bit vague. The first point I'd like to make is that the original place where the ideas for a resolution of the problem are there in a very important speech delivered by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in Amritsar in 2006. That speech was delivered in Punjabi. He spoke in Punjabi. But we made sure that English translation of it was immediately made available to the media. So I find in a lot of discussion, including reviews of this book, there's hardly any reference to the Amritsar speech. In fact, the Amritsar speech was the first public statement on the part of the Indian Prime Minister about his vision for a resolution of the problem. And when that speech was made, and it was made deliberately in Amritsar in Punjabi, in fact, we used to joke that the loudspeakers must have been so loud, the hope that it could be heard in Lahore. One of the reasons why it was done at that time was to see the reaction. And I think it was quite surprising that there was very little negative reaction. People forget this. Therefore, I actually disagree with my friend Ajay Bisaria when he said that the idea was ahead of its time. The times have changed. In other words, today it's an idea that is no longer appears as feasible, because in fact the relationship has deteriorated over the last 10 years. For a variety of reasons. That's not the subject of this evening's discussion. But the deterioration in the relationship over these 10 years makes these ideas today appear as if they are ahead of their time. But I take you back to that period, in 2003, when the famous speech of Prime Minister Vajpayee, Insaniyat Jumhuriyat, uh, very appealed, Kashmiriyat, and the Amritsar speech of Dr. Manmohan Singh. A very conscious effort was being made by the leadership in both countries. There was, of course, opposition to both. There was opposition in Pakistan, there was opposition in India. And many people associated with the Vajpayee government, who were then advising people in the BJP, which was an opposition political party at that time, were actively campaigning against some of these ideas in the media. So there was opposition in India to this way of looking at the problem, of making borders irrelevant. There was opposition in Pakistan. When Prime Minister Manmohan Singh took the first concrete step of opening a bus route from Srinagar to Muzaffarabad, there was a terror attack the night before with the aim of disrupting that the launch of that bus. And in fact, the Intelligence Bureau in Delhi and the Home Secretary and the Home Minister briefed the Prime Minister and said, "Don't go to Srinagar." I remember that late at night, 10 in the night, there was a meeting where all the facts of that terror attack were presented, and the advice Prime Minister was, "Don't go." He listened to all the advice. At the end of the meeting, he actually stood up, with everybody then standing up, and said, "I'm going." And that was it. Next morning, we flew to Srinagar, and the bus was launched. So, the environment and the mood then was that we can do this. I think part of the reason was the fact that there was assumption was that President Pervez Musharraf in Pakistan also had uh, the clout, the influence with the armed forces to operationalize some of these ideas. It would not have been a dramatic move, but step by step, the bus was one. There were going to be other initiatives. But a variety of political developments, both in Pakistan and in India, uh, disrupted that process. And today it appears completely, you know, a far-fetched kind of thing that you can actually have a situation where borders are no longer relevant. It will require a reconstruction of the environment. And let me stop by just referring to this, what I mean by reconstruction of the environment. Ajay mentioned the terror attacks which we had between 2004 and 2007 in Mumbai, in Delhi, Saroj Nagar Market. Agartala to Calcutta, and he was to spend the night in Calcutta and have series of meetings the next day in Calcutta. But when the news came on the plane, he told the pilot that we need to fly straight to Delhi. Then the pilot said we need refueling in Calcutta. So we landed in the Calcutta airport. Jyoti Basu was there to receive him. And he said, "I'm not staying overnight." Plane was refueled. We landed in Delhi. He came straight to 7 Racecourse Road, by which time I had arranged all the TV cameras to be there. And the first thing he did was to go live on television and urge the people of this country to remain calm. There's a terror attack. It is meant to disrupt peace between the two countries. And he went live on television urging people to stay calm. Every time there was a terror attack, there would be a live television broadcast by the Prime Minister to urge people to stay calm. So the deliberate effort was made to keep temperatures low in order to be able to take this initiative forward. Now, we don't have time to discuss why they went out, but I'm glad that Mr. Lamba has now put all the facts as he was aware of them, and he was a person who was in the loop right through, as has been mentioned. I think it's a very important book, but now, in my judgment, it's more of history than a map.
Thank you, Venkat, for inviting me to be part of this interesting panel. What I thought I'll say is really one about Mr. Lamba. I was not in the government, but I engaged with him when he was our High Commissioner to Pakistan. And later, we were members of the National Security Advisory Board. And then I used to travel with him a lot in the track 2. So got to know him quite close. And always used to pester him, tell me about the 4 points, kind of thing. Being a good civil servant, would never give it away. But he had a sense of his deep empathy for Pakistan. See, normally when you negotiate, if you don't understand your adversary, you can never really negotiate. So I think what he brought was a clear understanding of what their perceptions and problems are. But at the same time, utter clarity in terms of what India can give or not. And to be able to negotiate with Pakistan for a period of time on a practical, realist basis, which can be work acceptable to both. Because in the end, you can have a genius proposal, but if the other side has a veto on every proposal you make. So I think he brought something unique, probably because, like Mr. Manmohan Singh, he was one of the last people who had a direct link to Pakistan. His family was from Peshawar, and his parents had, in the partition, come over. So he knew Pakistan very well. He had, as being part of the elite families in Pakistan. Before partition, he had a good, in and reach with the elite of Pakistan when he was serving and negotiating. So I think he brought something unique. And as it turned out, he spent among all his generation of foreign service officers the maximum time and on the desk and in negotiating with Pakistan, both when he was ambassador there and later as the special envoy. Second thing I wanted to say was to do keep this book vigilant. Right now, Pakistan is not in use, but it'll come back sooner than later. There is no single guide which actually explains clearly what India's positions are. And also the negotiating history between the two sides. Because a lot of times the confusion on what their position on the UN resolutions, what did they do when, it gets conflated by the current positions. But I think here is a book, actually, you can keep going back to it as a quick reference to when you want to know what was both the record as well as the defined positions of both sides. The third thing I wanted to say about was the 2004 to 7 when these negotiations were done by him on a settlement on Kashmir. I don't know if it is ahead of time or not, but it was really the closest when India and Pakistan came to actually agree on a negotiated settlement on the Kashmir question. I mean, it had broadly 3-4 elements. One, where both sides will devolve more power to their respective Kashmirs. Pakistan would reduce, its violence. India would reduce the number of military troops there. A third, that the idea that the settlement will not change the borders, but will change the nature of the border. That is facilitating greater engagement across the border. And finally, this was the real innovation of some kind of a joint governance. If you say shared sovereignty, of course, both sides will go crazy. But the idea of getting the two parts of Kashmir to have a mandate to work on themselves, that is, Srinagar, Muzaffarabad will have a mandate, a political mandate to negotiate, to govern on a set of issues. I believe the paper actually had identified those areas. But anyway, I mean, that was the broad framework. And this was really between 2004 and 7, we came very close to clinching that. But then all kinds of things has happened. Musharraf lost his power. In India too, it was not easy to generate support for the agreement. So that, what it tells you is that through the history of India-Pakistan, it is a history of missed opportunities. There are many points, whether it's Rajiv Gandhi, Benazir Bhutto, or when Narasimha Rao tried to negotiate some things with Nawaz Sharif, later Vajpayee Nawaz Sharif, then Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh and Musharraf. So there were frequently moments when we could do the big stuff on Kashmir, or a number of times where actually we could do the smaller stuff. For example, in the same 2004 to 6 period, a solution to Kashmir, to Siachen question, a solution to the Sir Creek question. And then the World Bank and the ADB had done enormous work on how to facilitate trade. We all talk about pipelines, pipelines coming from Central Asia to South Asia. But actually, Pakistan could have got a pipeline 40 miles from across India. That India, as an exporter of petroleum products, was in a position to actually, with a small 40-kilometer pipeline, directed in the other direction, that is from India to Pakistan. That it came very close. The petroleum secretary said negotiate, but that died. Power transmission today, what we do with Bangladesh and Nepal, power trading. There was a serious attempt at negotiating on power trading arrangements. And then there were occasions where we tried to revive tourism and a range of other issues. But then each time something would take it all apart. So where does this leave us today? I mean, the last 10 years, I think the Modi government came to power with a clear sense that the terms of engagement with Pakistan must be altered. That is, it can't be a framework in which India would make concessions, or the idea that the status of Kashmir is open-ended and that there would be no quarter on the idea that India must make concessions on Kashmir in order to have peace with Pakistan. I think that was fundamentally unacceptable. And I think what you saw, but within this framework, there was room for engagement. Mr. Modi went to Lahore. So Nawaz Sharif's his birthday, his granddaughter was getting married on a short notice of 3 hours. So there was this boldness at one level of actually reaching. But at the same time, also making it clear the whole framework does not apply. So in such sense, the 2004-7 framework is not something these people are not willing to accept. And then 2019 August, the change in the constitutional status of Kashmir was a clear sense, look, as far as what we do internally is closed. Of course, there was rhetoric about what we do with POK, what we do with Ladakh and all that. But this question that India's Kashmir status is open for negotiation was put to rest. Did that kill the process? No. That is the interesting thing. Actually, after 2019 August, there was interesting movement by the two sides to actually begin some kind of a negotiation. While the Pakistani's public position was, look, unless India reverses the constitutional amendment, there's no room for dialogue. But behind the scenes, there was an attempt, I think, to produce some kind of an understanding, which actually led to the 2021 ceasefire, where we resumed the 2003 ceasefire. And if you've been listening to Mr. Imran Khan, what he's been saying on YouTube last few days, you'll see there was a serious attempt at actually producing a framework in which the next steps after ceasefire, maybe the successor to Ambassador Bisaria would have gone there. There was talk about resuming some kind of a deal in one or two items. And then Mr. Modi would actually go to Pakistan. That's what at least the Pakistani press today or the Pakistani side is saying. No one from India is confirming. So there was a moment there, it looked like. In spite of 2019 constitutional changes, there was a room here to negotiate. And today, Imran Khan accuses Bajwa of selling out to India. We don't have to get into that. The fact is, once again, when we thought nothing was possible, there was actually a room for negotiation. So I would say, it's always, just when you think nothing is happening between India and Pakistan, there's always something going on. Just when you think things are going swimmingly well and somebody is wrecking with a wrecking ball, undermining. But I would say I'm optimistic because for two reasons. One, if you read this book, you'll find every major issue between us has been negotiated. That is the negotiating record, whether it's tourism, whether it's trade, whether it's selling oil, whether it is power trading, whether it is Kashmir, Siachen, Sir Creek, every single issue has been negotiated. That is, the path has been tread, but we walk back at each time, both sides. So there is a path forward if and when there is actually a political will to resume talks. Because a lot of small things can be done. whether we agree on Kashmir or other global issues or not. I think there is actually room. So the problem is not with the intractable nature of the problems between us, but of actually bringing the political will on both sides and getting over these spoilers in both the countries to say, look, this is a good idea. Let's move on, kind of a thing. So I would say, in terms of actual negotiating record, there is room to actually take fresh initiatives. The second reason for optimism is it looks like Mr. Nawaz Sharif is coming back. If there was one man in Pakistan who was continuously negotiated with us under different prime ministers of India, that he's been consistently in favor of peace with India and trade with India. So him, if he comes back with reasonable power, we can never say that. If he and the army chief get along on the other side, and if terrorism is controlled, I mean, which they've done before, it's not that it's something new they have to do. So I think there is again a possibility that the changes in Pakistan. And the third thing I would say is really the global context has changed, fundamentally changed. That is, Pakistan, which could mobilize massive amounts of international support with the US, the Gulf countries, China, of course. Today, barring China, it has very little, and Turkey, it doesn't have too much of support. And that from Pakistan's own perspective of a reconciliation, I mean, I'm not even saying friendship, settlement, even a minimal reconciliation will give it some scope to get its internal act together. But this is not something for us to tell them. They have to eventually decide. And for India, that we have problems with China, we have problems with Pakistan, that any reasonable effort to produce even a minimal amount of peace would provide us a lot more space to deal with other challenges. So in a sense, purely assuming there are rational actors on either side, there is actually room to construct something new. But of course, we have elections coming up in 24. They have elections coming up. I don't know if they'll take place or not, but there we are. So I would say the political calendars, always there is a problem of aligning them. But structurally speaking, there is actually new room for India and Pakistan to engage, but on terms that are fundamentally different than the idea that India must make concessions on Kashmir. And I think that phase is quite clearly over. The question is there a new way we can construct a framework to settle the disputes between the two sides?
Thank you, Raja. Thank you, Ajay, and thank you, Sanjay. Now, Q&A session. Those of you who want to ask questions, kindly raise your hand. Once you're identified, wait for a microphone to come to you. Identify yourself and ask the question, and pose the question to one of the panelists. All right? Thank you. Yes?
The elections are due for in the Pakistan. August 12 is this assembly is over. It's going to be over. Will these elections have any future relevance for the India-Pakistan relations and for the Pakistan itself also? Will these elections have any future? It will also meet the same fate as the past elections have.
Would you like to answer? Any panelist can answer. Well, I think the answer to both questions is yes, very emphatically. The elections are a very key issue for within Pakistan on what is, the kind of political direction it takes. At this point of time, there are multiple theories or predictions on scenarios. One is that election takes place in a minus Imran scenario. That with Ms. Imran Khan out of the picture, with the PTI having become a party that would be definitely minus Imran, it suits the army establishment to have elections where three competing parties talk to each other and have a weak kind of coalition government. But the other kind of possibility that we see today is that the elections don't take place and there is an extension because of the other crisis that Pakistan faces, which is more existential, which is the economic meltdown. And in that context, there is already conversation about having a situation as in the Punjab and KP the assemblies, which is you have a caretaker government and an extended caretaker scenario led by an economist, which tries to negotiate with the IMF and tries to get the economy stabilized before the civilian politicians are brought back again. So the scenario is of a technocratic government. But as Raja mentioned, for India, it definitely has an implication. I think for India, there is a need for strategic patience and gradualism. So I think that the elections taking place now or in 2024 in Pakistan and Indian elections taking place after these, I think a window of opportunity opens to do all the things that could gradually lead to a situation of stability and normalcy in the relationship, which means we could have an exchange of high commissioners, we could have high level conversations, we could even think of leading it up to a SAARC summit, which Pakistan is supposed to host. So, yes, the elections are a key factor in the timeline.
Yes, sir. Out of three panelists, two did not give any like they did not give any hope. They said that it's a history. It's of the points that Mr. Lamba raised. It's like history. It was way ahead of time. Mr. Raja, of course, he sounded optimistic. He's hope. I read the book. I have been following Pakistan and India relationship quite closely. I want to ask you, like, the nature of government, the way this government functions, data-driven and very majoritarian agenda. How do you think that this government can engage with Pakistan, and why we think that Pakistan would be flexible so far as Kashmir is concerned? So my question is, what is the way forward if this government, this paranoid regime that we have, like so far as Pakistan is concerned or Kashmir, how do you think that they can move ahead? Because domestic politics is quite linked with the Vajpayee kind of flexibility and Manmohan Singh kind of flexibility you don't see in this regime. Second, my question is that other way, like this government has such an absolute majority, and they have the confidence, the larger confidence of this nation. No government, I think, in the last 40, 50 years enjoyed this kind of a trust. Why this regime, instead of choosing to go ahead and solve the issue that they could have done, instead they did what they did, and they are now, we are actually in a situation where we don't know the way ahead. Only thing is we keep on militarizing the region. We have exposed ourselves further to the threats from outside. That's my question. I think all three panelists are relevant. Their answers are relevant.
Good evening to all the speakers. My name is Yashwin. I'm a research intern at the Indian Council of World Affairs. So my question is directed to Raja sir and Ajay sir. Sir, so we see that there is rise of TTP's activities. At the same time, there is insurgency rising in Balochistan, and we have also seen protest in Gilgit-Baltistan for greater autonomy from Pakistan. So how does this entire instability in the periphery affect Pakistan in the future? Since we also see that there is economic turmoil, there is political turmoil at the same time, and how does it impact India going forward? And my next question is, since we're talking about peace, last week itself, India and China signed the nuclear plant deal, and today itself, yeah, yes, Pakistan and China. Sorry. And today itself, in the news, we saw that China is also assisting Pakistan in the LOC with infrastructure as well. So, how do we see this in China-Pakistan engagement having an impact for India? And do we see the relations between the two countries going towards this? Thank you.
We'll take one more question. Let's show that. Yes. Sanjeev?
Should I give him the mic?
Good evening, dignitaries. Myself, Aghasid Muntazar Mehdi from Srinagar. My question is for Ajay sir. We are seeing post 2019 a posture where the New Delhi has delegitimized all the processes, all those processes which used to take in post 2004 2014 era. It has delegitimized the dialogue between India and Pakistan, between Delhi and Srinagar. No doubt, India has contained the situation. It has a grip on the situation. But I want to know what's the shell life of containing the situation? Can we say it's a permanent resolution of the issue, or how long it will be contained? Is there any resumption of dialogue between India and Pakistan or between Delhi and Srinagar? Thank you.
Okay, so let me take a stab at all three questions. On the first question about what this government, how this government is different from the other two, I would push back at the premise. I think that all of India's prime ministers, if you see the history of 75 years of this relationship, have the instinct of trying to solve the Pakistan conundrum. And all of them have made these efforts. So, if Vajpayee's instinct was to get into a bus and go to Lahore in February 1999, and Dr. Manmohan Singh's instinct was to give his speech in Amritsar and talk about breakfast in Amritsar, lunch in Lahore, and dinner in Kabul. Don't forget that Prime Minister Modi also went to Lahore. The first 18 months of this current dispensation was spent in using or in displaying exactly the same instincts that previous prime ministers had displayed, which is, can we resolve this issue? Nawaz Sharif coming to Modi signing in or swearing in was one instance. After that, there was a series of meetings. Sushma Swaraj was in Pakistan in December of 2015, before Modi's visit, which was more spontaneous on the 25th of December. And there was already a decision to start a composite dialogue or resume that composite dialogue. Even when the situation deteriorated in 2016, there was an instinct of trying to use creative diplomacy to resolve it. And I had multiple conversations in this with the NSA, with the Prime Minister when I was there in 2017 to 19. But I think the point really is that what has happened in India is that the tolerance at a public and policy level of terrorism has gone down. So I would argue that particularly the kind of terrorism India faced in the 21st century, and a major inflection point was 2008. Since then, the tolerance of terrorism has gone down, and therefore this government has had to have a tougher posture, and which translated into no talks with terror, because there was an overall sense of not tolerating terrorism anymore. So I think the instinct for resolving the issue was coupled with a kind of rise in terrorism, and that led to the kind of situation that we have today. On the second question on how this links up with Pakistan's internal crisis, yes, it does. Pakistan is going through a poly crisis, and it's, I think, the most severe strand of this poly crisis is the economic meltdown, which I think is a result of the kind of economic misgovernance in Pakistan of the last 7 decades. And because of that, also at the same time comes this huge security crisis. So there is trouble in the periphery, and a political crisis seems to have stabilized and managed. but the economic and security crisis won't go away, and particularly the attack from the TTP and so on. So I think on the China-Pakistan question, yes, that is a scenario of a China-Pakistan collusion of two front or a continuous front situation of adversaries against India, which India needs to be prepared for. India needs to be prepared for it politically, diplomatically, and most of all, militarily, because that is a distinct scenario in the future. We've got to play to that scenario and prepare for it. And on the Kashmir question, I feel that somewhere the paradigm has shifted. Policymakers in India now accept that India's Kashmir policy needs to be different and separate from India's Pakistan policy. So the time has gone where a prime minister would go to Kashmir and make an announcement and say, "मैं पाकिस्तान को फिर दोस्ती का हाथ बढ़ाता हूँ," which is what Prime Minister Vajpayee did in 2003. Now there is a recognition that Kashmir policy is an internal issue. Negotiation with Kashmiris is an internal issue, and dealing with Pakistan is an external issue, and these need to be separated.
Sanjay?
I think, I don't want to wade into the domestic politics, but, the nature of domestic politics does not automatically translate into foreign policy. Even on a case like Pakistan, which is so intimately tied to our own domestic politics. Because you would have thought the UPA government, which actually was doing so much of negotiations, you would see the Prime Minister go to Pakistan. He didn't. That is 10 years, Mr. Manmohan Singh. I know for a fact he was very eager to go. In fact, after the Amritsar speech, as the negotiations progressed in 2004 to 7, there was a lot of expectation. Mr. Khoshrau, all this stuff about his village in Goa. There was a big effort to actually make him go. But the Congress party, this is my reading, I could be wrong, was not in favor of Mr. Manmohan Singh going to Pakistan. So that was the situation. So where actually the party that did so much would not actually, the Prime Minister could not travel across because the way the configuration of positions. But if you take the two NDA governments, Mr. Vajpayee went twice to Pakistan, which is wise or not, but he went twice, both in 99 as well as in 2004 January, which laid the basis for peace process. And Mr. Modi, who went on a short notice of 3 hours, he showed up there. And of course, Mr. Modi also invited Nawaz Sharif for his first inauguration. It was May 2014. So I would say that we have to be careful extrapolating domestic politics. And in fact, some people would argue, like Nixon went to China, the right-wing parties have a better chance of making difficult decisions, whether it's true or not. There you are. So I would say that the record of the Modi government on Pakistan, whether there were a couple of rounds of talks in Ufa and other places, there was an engagement. And as I said, post-2019 engagement showed that, look, they are like every other government. They've also tried to engage and find a way out. Second, in terms of incentives for Pakistan, you mentioned about Pakistan having problems. Don't we? We have a two-front problem. After all, the ceasefire came at a time when you had a serious problem on the Himalayas. So I think there's no country without problems. A positive way of looking at it is, look, if you reduce one problem, your overall room for engagement will grow. That is, if you have a trap with Pakistan, then the question of China's overwhelming influence, can that be marginalized? I mean, that's always been a calculation. Do you keep up a separate track? So I think there is room. I mean, there is incentive. The question today, as I said, is not willingness or it is really political calendars, how that is going to align. Because Pakistan is in no position to talk to you. The imperatives for them to engage India is much higher, I would say. But today, they're in the middle of a huge political crisis. They're in the middle of a serious economic crisis. So they'll have to settle down. But my sense is once they settle down, and by the time hopefully we'll have a new government or the next government, there will be room. So I would say it is a question of how do you manage the interim in between.
Let me just come in on that. it's not correct to say that Dr. Manmohan Singh was not willing to go to Pakistan or the Congress party was not in favor. I'm sorry, that's not factually correct. The fact is that in the period from 2004 to 2008, that was the period in which this dialogue was happening. And if in September 2007, the politics of Pakistan had not moved in a direction where Musharraf was weakened by the judiciary, and then subsequently Benazir Bhutto was assassinated, the environment in Pakistan was not conducive for any initiative at that point in time. If those incidents had not happened, if the problem that President Musharraf had with the judiciary in 2007 and the assassination of Benazir Bhutto had not happened, and this dialogue had moved forward, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh would have gone to Pakistan. The turning point was November 2008, the terror attack in Mumbai, after which there was no way in which Dr. Manmohan Singh could go to Pakistan till Pakistan acknowledged the role elements there played in that attack, the Mumbai terror attack of November. So the circumstances of that period were such that in the second term of Dr. Manmohan Singh, the visit simply could not happen. Though, let me say, and I know this for a fact, that colleagues of Mr. Bisaria and the Foreign Ministry were constantly advising him to go, despite all of this. But he took a political decision that until there is some acknowledgement on the part of Pakistan for the role its elements there played in the November 2008 attack in Mumbai, there was no way an Indian Prime Minister could travel to Pakistan. So it's not correct to say that politics in India prevented any further movement. It was the situation in Pakistan that in fact prevented any further movement. Today, I think the situation is not, you see, one visit to Lahore of Prime Minister Modi, these are empty gestures. That was a completely empty gesture. The homework that you need for a visit like that to fructify into something. Raja mentioned Nixon going to Beijing. How much homework went into that? So visit alone is not going to make a difference. The homework that was being made between 2003 and 2008 that could have created a situation where the Kashmir issue was resolved in a manner that would stabilize the subcontinent did not happen. Today we say, oh, Kashmir is now an internal problem, Pakistan is an external problem. We have separated the two. We can live with that illusion. We can live with that illusion. But in my judgment, there is no way you can stabilize this region without a meeting of minds, which I don't see happening, given the politics of both countries. The domestic politics of both countries have created an environment which has reversed the process that began with Prime Minister Vajpayee's Jumhuriyat, Kashmiriyat, Insaniyat, and went on till the end of 2007, at the time when Benazir Bhutto was assassinated. That was the period of hope. That period is over. So now we can read books about what was planned, but I don't see the political environment in either country for a return to that. And to simply say, okay, here's a fait accompli, Kashmir is a part of India, take it or leave it, I don't think it's going to solve the problem.
We'll take three questions together. Sanjeev, then KP, and Neelam.
Raja, my question is to you. I'm neither a journalist nor something to do with bureaucracy or politics. We run Seher, I run Seher, and we've done some of the most significant people-to-people soft diplomacy initiatives between India and South. 2007, when India was hosting the 14th SAARC Summit, it was me who actually asked for the rock bands festival at Puramakila, and we did it very successfully. I asked painters of all the SAARC nations, including Afghanistan and later on with Ghana, that we brought them together and we asked them to come place and converge their creative energy to bring people onto different platforms. somewhere I just feel, and I have talked to subsequent foreign secretaries, subsequent joint secretaries, that are even after 2008 attacks, we resumed the cultural diplomacy and the softer initiatives and touching the cores of people. Because, it's one thing, I understand the compulsions of the corridors of power. But to the corridors of power, the hearts of the people need to be brought together. Because unless the people come together, of what use is a visit of the Prime Minister or anybody of Foreign Secretary? You need to bring the people together. Have we missed the bus in that? Have we missed the bus? Because I remember Farida Khanum coming, and I had organized a concert in Sri Lanka in 2007. I had organized Abhita Parveen at Purana Kela for External Affairs Policy Association. Now, where are those initiatives? I understand that there is a political attack or there is a terrorist attack, and you don't want to do people's initiatives. But aren't we missing the bus on that somewhere? Because I have requested everybody, including Ajay, but there have been compulsions that people-to-people contacts have not been received. Yeah.
We are classmates from St. Stephen's College, St. Stephen's High. Mr. Bisaria, I am a daughter of Kashmir. I am Kashmiri, and I am a historian on Kashmir also. And my book, Oh My Kashmir, is coming out. And I've got Kashmir for 30 years. All of you know, and everybody knows what has happened in the past, starting from the Shimla agreement. But like we all said, the deadlock has to end somewhere, because we are neighbors, and peaceful neighbors and economically well-settled neighbors is very important for India as well. Leave alone over the internal problems of Kashmir, the eradication of Article 370 and 35A, now whatever that be, or making it into a union territory, as you said, these are the different things. But Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's been your colleague and foreign secretary, now a foreign minister, why cannot we, Sanjay, initiate a dialogue between secretary levels, then minister level, and then prime minister level? Let's create a situation of peace between India and Pakistan, because this deadlock is not going to help both the countries. And the internal situations, what's going on in Pakistan is terrible. What's going on in India is terrible. These are internal problems of both the countries. But we must have peace between India and Pakistan. I want your sincere comments on this.
KP Nair, I'm a columnist. I would like to ask the two panelists who are at the Prime Minister's office whether they could throw some light on the talks between Jayan Dikshit and Tariq Aziz, which were presented to Manmohan Singh and Pervez Musharraf at their meeting in Roosevelt Hotel in New York. Because these talks appear to have been the basis for a future settlement between the two countries. And I'm asking you to throw some light on this, because Manmohan Singh was kept in the dark, completely in the dark about what was going on. And I was told at that time that there was no record of these talks. Jayan Dikshit did not want any record to be kept of these talks. So much so that when Dikshit died, Tariq Aziz came here under the guise of paying condolences, and apparently he tried to find out, does anybody in Delhi know what went on between me and Mani? And it appears that there was no record of it. There was no part of the reason why the whole thing stalled was because there was no record of it. So could Sanjay, who was in the Prime Minister's office at that time, throw some light on it, and Ajay, who would have come across the papers later on at various stages and in the archives. It would be very interesting to know what those discussions were, because at that point of time, I was told that in a year there would be a settlement of the Kashmir issue, but because of Mr. Dikshit's death, everything fell apart. That is my.
If he mentions it somewhere, I forget now. My understanding, of course, KP, you know much more than all of us on all this. So, but let me say my hunch. The process of conversation between India and the United States and India, Pakistan, and India, China, all three conversations were initiated through Mr. Mani Dixit by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. When he became Prime Minister, these were the three items on his agenda as far as foreign policy was concerned. Conversation with China, conversation with the US, conversation with Pakistan. And in first 6 months, in fact, some people even at that time felt that Mani Dixit may have died because of overwork, overexhaustion. He had worked right through that 6 months on all these three issues. You were there in September 2004 in New York when the first meeting between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Pervez Musharraf happened, and the first meeting between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Bush happened, and the first meeting between him and Prime Minister Wen Jiabao happened. All three happened in September at the UN 2004. Mani Dixit was present. I don't think he was in the room with President Bush, but he was initially in the room with Prime Minister, with President Musharraf. It was Natwar who was kept out, as you very well know. So the conversation started then. But he died on 3rd January 2005. Now, I think the answer to your question would be, when did Mr. Manmohan Singh meet Lamba, and when did the Lamba Aziz conversation begin? Because it's entirely possible, I don't have the answer, that he carried forward a conversation that may have actually started with Mani Dixit. I'm not sure if they're in parallel in those first 6 months, but certainly after January 2005, the conversation between India and Pakistan was entirely through the Lamba process. And M.K. Narayanan, who then became NSA, was kept completely out of it. He had no role in that. M.K.'s role was only with the US and with China. But on Pakistan, the only conduit was Mr. Lamba.
Well, to KP's question, I haven't seen the records, but I did talk to Tariq Aziz multiple times in Islamabad. He used to come. I used to have dinner with him regularly. And he had several interlocutors, starting with Brijesh Mishra, and then, of course, Sati Lamba, and the conversation with Jane Dixit. So, but the broader point is, in this relationship, not everything is open. A lot of conversations take place which are verbal. Perhaps it shouldn't be for history's sake, but that is the fact. They become so sensitive at that point that they are verbally relayed back and forth. And Mr. Lamba mentions this, that at several points, at one point he was asked by Ronen Sen, was asked by Benazir, please don't put down anything on paper. Just go and tell Rajiv this is happening. So I think that is the nature of the business, that becomes so sensitive domestically that often these things are not recorded. But on your specific question, I really don't have the answer.
The record is in this book. You want the record? Look, I think Mr. Lamba did the negotiation. and Mr. Mani Dixit appointed. So the conversation had started between Mr. Vijesh Mishra, was MSA under the NDA government. On the Pakistani side, Tariq Aziz was already there on the other side. So when Dixit came, Lamba became the negotiator on the Indian side. So that was from the beginning. So at least he has said publicly, at least I've heard him say, the full record, entire record is there in the Prime Minister's office. Mr. Modi was briefed, he took charge. So I think there's a problem of record. This is the first public account. I mean, with all the care that the Indian civil servant has. If you want to know the record, the book is the record where the broad outlines of the negotiation have been there. And I think he narrates different phases of different interlocutors he had. Because after Musharraf, when the government changed, you had Shahryar Khan for a short while, you had others. So I would say it's not a problem of lack of paper. In this case, it's very much there. But the politics that complicated. Look, I think you can be an activist or you can be an analyst. I have no problem. We want more Pakistanis in Bollywood, more music, more cricket, more. There is a huge market for them. At this point, it is not happening. Is it a good thing? I don't think it's good. But as a reporter, as an analyst, our job is to see what is happening. But it's your job as an activist to say we want this. We want more of this. We want better visas. We want more freedom of movement of people. There were periods like 2004 to 2007, there was a dramatic expansion of the movement of artists, of sports. And in fact, one reason Musharraf came to Delhi, that's when one of the initial negotiations of the deal was April 2005, the Delhi cricket match. So Musharraf himself came. So I think, look, that we need more people-to-people contact. I don't think anybody would contest that. But as analysts, I'm saying, why is it stuck? That's my question. That there are problems to do. And if and when, as I said, I'm hopeful, dialogue resumes, this is the first thing, easiest thing to do, trade transaction, which is what Bajwa had opened the door. Mr. Imran Khan as the commerce minister said yes. Then as Prime Minister, he overruled it. This was all 2021, February, March. So there were attempts made as recently as 2 years ago to resume the process. But it's stuck. But at this point, I would say, please put more pressure on the governments, both the governments. Get your friends in Pakistan to actually demand greater federation. And it's popular pressure works. So I would say, more power to your elbow. Please mobilize more to demand greater, liberalization. And even going back to where we go in 2004 to 7, I think will be a good thing. But our job is not to analyze, not to. But there is a job to be done. There is putting pressure on the two governments to listen.
Hi, my name is Narayanan, and I would like to ask to Raja Mohan about specifically something. Between 2004 and 2007, you said it's a golden time for approximately kind of settlement. There was no China-Pakistan economic corridor at that time. So my question is that at that time, we remember we were even not ready to pronounce the full Kashmir word. We used to say K word, whenever a conversation happens. Now we are loud and clear. Pakistan occupied Kashmir is everywhere we can hear it. So, and there is a China-Pakistan economic corridor also. The China factory is also on the other side. So how do you see the situation?
Ramananda Sen-Gupta from Strat News Group. My question is to Ambassador Kasaria. Sir, how far would you agree that the conventional wisdom that the Pakistani deep state or the Pakistani army is the sort of main roadblock to peace, because if there is peace, they lose their reason to exist? That's number one. And my second question is to one of the things that has always bothered me, I think, Ambassador Kasaria was Vajpayee talks. And I was there for that. And one thing that really struck me was a little boy telling me that I could not be a Hindustani simply because I was not short, I wasn't fat, and I didn't have red eyes, and I didn't have fangs. So how do you sort of reconcile that kind of a narrative? I mean, how do you deal with that? Is there anything in the book which makes me feel?
Hello, my name is Naresh Sagar. My question is to both diplomats. I will call Sanjay a diplomat, sort of, because he got to the Prime Minister. As sort of. So my question goes on that can you just enunciate what Pakistan is? Is the ISI the main power? Is the army the power? Are the politicians which are fighting together is the power? Who are the people go and get the conversation intact, and how far you are dependable that these conversations will hold good. Because in India we have a elected government, we have a constant, parliament, and there we feel every time the economy is in shambles, the power game is in shambles, and even if stability comes, the army doesn't cost them, and ISI on the top of it will try to create some problem for Indian government. Even your country doesn't play an important role, although it is a hedge. The entire border is being sealed, but still you have got terrorism either through this way or from that problem. So how do you make the thing natural?
Just 1 minute. Sorry to interrupt. To answer your question, KP, page 275, very clearly, Mr. Lamba mentions that he was appointed as a special envoy in 2005 after Mani Dixit died. So he came in after the death of Mani Dixit.
Okay, so let me start with the last question. What you raised is a policy dilemma for India for the last 75 years. That's not new. Who do you talk to in Pakistan? Who matters there? And that is our job, try to unpack it at any particular point of time. But I think certainly the army establishment is key to any conversation. And there are nuances. Things keep changing. You might make the argument, as you mentioned, that the Pak army is the roadblock to peace, but that's not always true. In the last Imran Khan's time, it is the Bajwa doctrine and the army chief who wanted a better relationship with India than the civilian leader who was still a front for this hybrid regime. But the point was that the army was more keen on a better relationship than the civilian government. It was different in the past. For instance, in Nawaz Sharif's time, part of the reason he lost his job a couple of times was that he wanted a better relationship with India than the army did. So it keeps changing, and that is our job of analysts and policymakers in government to try and understand it. And I think one constant is that we need to be continuously engaged with the powers that be, with the army in whatever way. And that is always a dilemma because as an elected government, democratic government, you would be talking to an elected government. But at the same time, we need to have our channels of communication open with the army. And I think that answers your question as well, because the fact is that the army continues to be a very important element of the Pakistan power structure. But the point is that we also need to watch how the army changes, because the army's own attitude towards India can change from chief to chief, and they could have a different paradigm. For instance, now, given the huge power differential between India and Pakistan, the army seems to have a more realistic appreciation of India, and seems to have come to the conclusion that there is no military solution that can give Pakistan a better result. The army is also questioning terrorism, whether the costs of that may be more than the advantages they have got in the past, not just vis-a-vis India, but also globally. So I think the point is that we need to be engaging with the army in India, but we also need to be aware of how the equations keep shifting. And to Neelamji's point about peace, yes, of course, I think peace is important. Talking of everything is important. And I can tell you that from India's point of view, we do not shy away anymore about talking of Jammu and Kashmir and the whole composite dialogue from that started in 97, 98 was about saying that we are willing to talk about everything. I think how that peace will come will be with some degree of strategic patience. It will need some creative diplomacy at the end of it. We need to ride out the elections because the elections, don't make for the best of time. We also need to ride out the Pakistan's internal crisis because it's not in a position to have a conversation and take a major action.
I mean, just to say about the army question, when Bajwa was accused of, this telling Imran Khan, look, we are not in a position to fight India. He said, what did he say? Tel nahi hai wo tank chalane ke liye. So we can't really take on India. So it was journalists, anchors who said, Court Martial Bajwa. How dare he say Pakistan army can't? So sometimes we journalists also tend to be more hawkish than the actual army. So I think what he was saying that look, there is a training in Pakistan. They're in a difficult position, or they need some kind of. That's at least the position of Bajwa. We don't know what the next chief might be thinking. But I think this idea that look, today India's GDP is 10 times larger than Pakistan. There was a time when there was a notion that look, parity was the central concept of which India talks about. So I think there is a sense that within Pakistan, it was the civilians who really dropped the proposition for trade. Civilians who made it difficult for Bajwa to push through government initiatives. So I think we shouldn't go by the stereotype. Army is bad, civilians are good. It depends on the context. Sometimes army could be bad, sometimes civilians could be bad. But I think it is our policy to engage everyone. Second, on the lingo, Ajay Bisaria will kill you. That they keep the politicians on straight and narrow. POK means POK. That this is an old language that is strictly maintained by the MA Pakistan division. I remember once I noticed him saying India-Pakistan dispute. So I got a call from Joint Secretary. It's not a dispute. India never accepts a dispute. There's an issue. It's not a dispute. So I think the basic principles of how we deal, that is, the language is not important. That is established. On the CPEC, CPEC is a new name, but the Trans-Karakoram corridor goes back to the 70s. Well before CPEC came in 2012-2013. Our port was inaugurated by China. An idea that you run a corridor along the Indus, modernize the Karakoram corridor, and connect it to our port. That was already in place. So in fact, the Chinese Communist Party, those existing projects were shoved under Belt and Road, then they get the new name, but it was already there. So I think for us, the problem of China-Pakistan relationship, the deeper integration is an issue. And there was no period where it was not a. So the transfer of territory took place in 63 when Pakistan handed over part of Kashmir. The Karakoram corridor came in 73, and since then there's been a continuous expansion of China's presence in Kashmir. That's a reality. Look at the stereotypes. There are stereotypes on both sides. Probably textbooks, a whole lot of things. Look, this is nonsense. The thing is, a lot of these things can be changed if you begin to move on the political side. So I would put politics first. If we can get some things moving, I'll just give an example. Agra Summit. 1999, Kargil, the amount of patriotism that was mobilized, anger against Pakistan, we all had to give parts of the salary as well at those days. But within a year and a half, when it was announced that Musharraf will come to Agra, a dramatic change in the mood. So it's not that people are the problem. The problem is at the state level. If they want to move things, I'm sure it can easily generate huge popular support. So I would say look, again, I would want to conclude, there's always room to do new, engage them. And I sense the circumstances today, because of the election cycle, might not work out. But if there is a structural change, Nawaz Sharif coming back, the army chief, they might take a fresh look because they need to do the question of their trade with the neighbors. They need to deal with Afghanistan. They need to deal with India. India then might be in a position to respond to some of the initiatives because we're not talking about, again, going back to Kashmir. Start with the ambassadors. Resume 2 items of trade. Get some guys to play in IPL. I mean, there are a lot of small things that can be done if there is a moment and if terrorism is under control. There are a lot of possibilities. I would say, I wouldn't rule it out. Once we see in the next 3 months how the political structure will evolve in Pakistan.
May I ask the last question? You have a question?
संजय, जब 2 बारी बॉम्बे में अटैक हुआ, एक बार अपना स्टॉक एक्सचेंज के टाइम पे, दूसरी बार ये अपना फिर अटैक हुआ पाकिस्तान में, तो मनमोहन सिंह सरकार ने कोई सीरियस एक्शन नहीं लिया आर्मी की तरफ से कि उग्रवादियों के वहां जाके कैंप तोड़े जाए। इस सरकार ने तो ये काम करके दिखाया, तो उन्होंने क्यों नहीं किया? और उसके बाद गुजरात में भी अक्षरधाम में अटैक हुआ, तब भी कुछ नहीं किया सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट जब मनमोहन सिंह की थी। दूसरा क्वेश्चन सर अजय जी से है कि उस टाइम की अपना विदेश नीति और इस टाइम की विदेश नीति में क्या फर्क है?
That was an opinion, not a question, so I don't have to answer.
May I ask the last question? By the way, I'm very happy to see many diplomats and some from Pakistan, and now it's too long. So, by the way, the club is open to diplomats also. They're welcome to join the club. Thank you. Sorry, it's over now, please. We have to shut at 8 o'clock because, the army got involved in Pakistani politics in 1954. Since then, according to the calculations made by Mr. Lamba, 2/3 of the time, the army was running that country. The rest of the time, they never allowed a civilian to complete his term as the prime minister. And Benazir, when she was talking to Ron Hussein, she says, let's write down and exchange notes because this, we may be getting tapped and, that kind of thing. And she told somebody that, hello, if the army comes to know that I'm trying to improve relations, I might get sacked. And that's what happened to her and so on. So do you think that we need to kind of be interacting with the army also if and when a civilian government comes to power in Pakistan? Now they're going through difficulties. Should India have offered maybe $1 billion or $2 to them to kind of see them through this trouble? How do you look at relations between our two countries? 5 years down the line, will there be peace between our two countries?
So I think that's the $1 million question we are asking. Can there be peace between the countries? I would argue yes, there can be, and there needs to be on the part of policymakers an openness to keep observing how things are changing. And to your point about whether to engage with the army, yes, of course, we need to engage with every institution in Pakistan, which means the army as well as the civilians. And I would say that, to end on an optimistic note, there is a possibility of peace. You need to have the right kind of policy instincts to move ahead and, look for those opportunities of creative diplomacy. You also need strategic patience. There is some times when it's simply not possible. As Raja said, things change suddenly in the relationship, but we know that till Pakistan has its elections and India has its next elections, this is not a time for major moves on this issue. But certainly things are changing dramatically in Pakistan, and I think it is in India's interest to have a Pakistan which is not exporting terrorism to India, and a country with which we can do trade. So it is important to have an atmosphere free of violence, and it is also important to have a neighborhood where India is not continuously distracted by a problem. So therefore, I think peace is in India's interest, and I think even more in Pakistan.
Before I ask my colleague Awad to propose a vote of thanks, we want to give a small memento to our distinguished panelists. This is actually a specially designed cup, which is in this packet, okay, to celebrate our 66th anniversary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. On behalf of the Foreign Correspondents Club, I would like to thank our distinguished guest for accepting the invitation, discussing a book of a great interest for all of us who cover South Asian affairs, because we cover the regional and international affairs. Whenever India and Pakistan meet together, they'll always hijack the agendas of the rest of the topics. So we know for sure that this book, maybe it is a part of history, but it is also part of interest that every one of us should have a copy, which is already outside. Mr. Sanjay Barwa is a very distinguished person. We have long association with him. He has been the advisor to the Prime Minister, and we thank him for organizing the FCC meeting with the former Prime Minister at that time. We had a good meeting with him. Mr. Ajay Bisaria, he has lots of things to tell us, and I'm sure in the next topic of India, Pakistan, the way ahead, I'm sure lots of visit to our club will make us feel more comfortable in listening to your talks, and you were very informative and very frank and very direct, especially being a diplomat. You crossed the limit of explaining the truth feeling, in fact, I must say, because you were very frank in your putting up the issues, and that's good, the positive vibe I can see of the future lying ahead for India and Pakistan. Of course, my colleague and Dr. Raja Mohan, we go long years, and I've been witnessing him. I've seen his book and those talks, and thank you very much for coming back to the club again. Our Foreign Correspondent Club is meant for Indian journalists and foreign correspondents based in South Asia. We have around 1,000 plus now members. It's open for diplomat as well. It's open for press attaches. It's open for corporate members. We welcome all of you. We welcome all the diplomats who have been associated with us and came and join us today. And please feel free to come and have a drink in the clubs, and also to have your tea and coffee. And we conclude this by thanking all of you for being here tonight. Thank you.